Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum and welcome to another edition of Muslims Uncensored with me, Robert Carr, Roshan Sali as well. And of course, we're welcomed by a very esteemed guest, our dear friend and colleague, Dilly Hussein, who joins us on this very special show. It is an important show because the situation in Syria has escalated. There's been a major offensive conducted by the armed groups from Idlib, and the gains that they have made has been quite astonishing, to say the least. I think it's caught everyone completely off guard. Aleppo has fallen, a major historic city in the north of Syria, and they're pushing on further. Now they're on the gates of Hama, and of course Homs and even Damascus. People are questioning whether they'll be able to push as far as that in the weeks and months to follow. How much is the situation changing on the ground in Syria, and what implications will that have for the region, including the situation in Palestine? Those are some of the questions which we'll be tackling in today's show. So, assalamu alaikum, brothers. Thank you very much for coming on, Dilly. It's been a pleasure to have you on again. I think it's important that we do, simply because, you know, you've spoken about Syria for years. It's been very well known, your views, but perhaps some of those views have changed now. This is what we're going to discuss today. And likewise, Roshan, as well, you've been covering the Syrian civil war as well, as one of the greatest Muslim journalists on the world, if I do say so. If I may dare, I'm going to...
A rare compliment from Robert.
Be a rare compliment. I think it's an important issue. So let's get started. I mean, Dilly, perhaps you want to start off. I'm sure you've got a lot you want to say. What's the situation right now in Syria?
The situation that we've seen over the last week has been a rapid offensive by a coalition of Syrian rebel factions, primarily Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham, led by Julani, and the Syrian National Army, which is basically an extension or funded and supported by Turkey. It happened at a critical time, within 48 hours of the ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel. So the timing is interesting. I don't think the rebel factions are making that a secret, that the weakening of Hezbollah through its recent military engagement with Israel has certainly weakened it, logistically, materially, from a leadership point of view, and they're stretched out. So they've made huge advancements, taken most of Aleppo, if not the entirety of Aleppo, the entirety of Idlib, and they've now entered the gates of Hama. There are rumours, unconfirmed, that even the countryside areas of Damascus, there have been exchanges and skirmishes there. And this is something that was unforeseeable for many who had maybe forgotten Syria. A war which began as a revolution, 13 years, 650,000 people killed, 12 million displaced, 7 million of those outside of the country. It's a horrific 13 years. It was a tense period even when we covered it in our early years as 5 pillars. More so because of the sectarianism it stoked and the very kind of deep emotions it kind of resonated with people, and what it began as and what it became. So Aleppo is under current Syrian rebel control, as is Idlib, as are most of the areas outside of Hama. There's also things happening in Deir ez-Zor, there's Homs, there's many places now that are showing that could potentially fall into the control of the Syrian rebels. Obviously, for our viewers, we need to highlight that Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham is a prescribed group under UK law. Under UK law, they do not differentiate between Al-Qaeda and Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham. Now, the reality of that from an academic, analytical point of view is that HTS have claimed that they left Al-Qaeda in 2018. When they were Jabhat al-Nusra, yes, they were an extension of Al-Qaeda in Syria. Then when they were Jabhat al-Fatah al-Sham, I think that's when they departed. And that departure has been there for about 6 years. Even Western kind of neocon commentators and pundits and researchers and academics acknowledge this fact. But under UK law, HTS is prescribed, is a prescribed group. The Syrian National Army, basically under the control or influence of Turkey, financially, militarily. They've made huge gains in the Kurdish areas in the north. Obviously, we know that Turkey has, or Erdogan specifically, has a dual interest here. The first interest is extending that buffer zone between Turkey and the Kurdish areas in Syria, which for him is a national security threat. He even told Assad, or his administration have informed Assad, that we're tackling terrorism. This is an issue of securing our national interests because we have a Kurdish threat with the PKK and other groups. The second interest is that if a buffer zone is created and these large swathes of areas are held by the Syrian rebels, then many Syrians from Turkey can eventually go back, resettle, and that will have, I'm sure, huge advantages for him and his popularity in the polls in Turkey.
Before we go into it too deeply and before I bring you in, Roshan, I think to help us kind of understand everything that you've mentioned a little bit easier, I'm going to play out this video which was created for 5 Pillars. It will help the audience to understand exactly the breakdown, what group's active and where.
What's happening in Syria? Last week, viral footage of anti-Assad Syrian rebels marching into Aleppo circulated online. At a breakneck pace, these fighters captured much of northern Syria, placing central Syria in their crosshairs. Their goal, according to the leader of the rebel offensive Tahrir al-Sham, is to continue to liberate our territories to ensure a safe return of our displaced people and to remove the threat of the criminal regime and Iranian militias. After the recent Syrian civil war, which began in 2011, an estimated 610,000 died. Millions were displaced. The cause of the bloodshed was a brutal conflict between the Assad regime and different groups trying to topple the dictator, Bashar al-Assad. So what's behind the rebels' sudden ability to breach Assad's key strongholds in 2024? Well, Assad's primary backers, Russia and Iran, are stretched thin. Russia is too tied up in Ukraine to provide battlefield intelligence and aerial support, and Iran is too occupied with its proxy wars with Israel to adequately support Iraqi and Syrian forces on the ground. With these resources diverted, the rebels seize the opportunity to exploit Assad's growing vulnerability. But what does this mean for Israel? Some Israeli officials will no doubt welcome the weakening of the resistance axis, while others feel that the collapse of the Assad regime would likely create chaos in which military threats against Israel would develop. With the US military on standby and Israel controlling the Syrian Golan Heights, an area it has occupied since 1967, the fall of the Assad regime could ignite a broader conflict, one that could easily spill over Syria's borders.
So there we go, more details there. Dilly, before I bring in Roshan, I assume that there is a little bit more you want to say.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to set the picture for our younger viewers who might be in their mid-20s or late 20s or early 30s. I would have been very young and maybe not followed the Syrian Revolution, the Arab Spring, when it happened in 2011. The situation in Syria, or at least the situation that had faced Bashar al-Assad, was that he was seeing these revolutions, these uprisings taking place across the Arab world. Ben Ali fell in Tunisia, Gaddafi fell in Libya, Ali Abdullah Saleh fell in Yemen, Hosni Mubarak in Egypt. That's ultimately what all Arab regimes at the time were facing the threat of from their people, these popular revolutions. And the issue in Syria started with the death of a 13-year-old called Hamza Ali al-Khatib, a 13-year-old boy who done some anti-regime graffiti. He was kidnapped, abducted by regime forces, tortured, and his body tortured, given back to his family. And that started the protests in Dara, which then led to defections from the Syrian army. And that's when the kind of debate happens. When did foreign forces first enter Syria? Was it foreign fighters that came through Turkey that had joined the rebel factions, or was the mass defections that Assad saw in the early years result in Hezbollah and Iranian militias coming in to protect the holy shrines? That's where the debate and difference tends to start in Syria. Where did the foreign forces first come? Who fired the first gunshots? I would argue that the Assad regime turned its guns on its own people.
Now, Roshan, one of the things which might be interesting to discuss before we get into the opinions that are going to surround and answering some of those questions from our point of view would be this man here. So this is Abu Mohammed al-Julani, who's basically a wanted man. I think there's about a $10 million bounty on his head from the United States. He's he's on the designated list in the US and UK, but he's basically being described as the main man who's leading this offensive against the Assad regime. Yeah. He's the head of kind of like a coalition group, and obviously HTS as well. What do you have to say about him? What do you know about this character? Because he's very important now for what's going on.
Yes, so Julani was the head of Jabhat al-Nusra, which was an extension, as Dilly said, of Al-Qaeda. in Syria. It broke with Al Qaeda in about 2016 or something like that, 2018. But they still share basically the same ballpark ideology. Although since the beginning of this conflict, this recent conflict, he has tried to kind of do a bit of outreach, hasn't he? I'm not sure about the details of that. I think to Christians and other minorities, you got nothing to fear from us. We're not Al Qaeda. We're not the group we used to be, etc. But as Dilly said, according to the West, UK, US, and others, he's on a wanted list. Hayat Tahrir Sham is a prescribed organisation, so no one in the UK can support it without risk going to jail. Brothers and sisters, please don't support it in the comments because we might have people monitoring you as well. So yeah, that's who he is.
Yeah, I know that it's been a while since he broke off officially from Al Qaeda, and since then he has been for a number of years actually trying to reform his image there. I think he wants to make himself someone who can be backed, basically. I think he wants to portray himself as a legit opposition character, there's no doubt about that. And I think we're actually seeing attempts being made by fighters in Syria to try and reform that image as well, because I think that's obviously what's held on is the baggage from his links to Al Qaeda and so on.
The organizational objectives changed. They reprioritized. When it was Jabhat al-Nusra, they were kind of focused on establishing an Islamic state according to a particular ideology and understanding of Islam, and potentially spreading it elsewhere. So it was a kind of could be argued Jabhat al-Nusra's outlook at the time was pan-Islamic and went beyond the borders of Syria. Then they kind of broke away with that. Then it was a case of there were theological differences between the different factions. But for sure, the Julani now is someone who is showing signs of being a statesman, a leader, engaging with minorities, securing their rights. There's been videos coming out of Druze communities, Christian communities in Halep and other areas that are saying, look, things are fine. Yeah, there's a shortage of electric and water and there's a curfew. Other than that, we're still going to the church and everything's fine and we're preparing for Christmas. But we shouldn't underestimate why Jabhat al-Nusra was one of the most, if not the most effective fighting force amongst all the Syrian rebel factions. It's because they had gained the most ground. They were most disciplined to begin with, putting their ideology and theology aside. One of the reasons why even Western analysts said that they were successful is because there wasn't as much corruption within Jabhat al-Nusra as, let's say, the Free Syrian Army at a time in previous years. They seemed way more ideologically committed to whatever their cause was. And of course, they were funded and armed very well. It was debatable whether it was Turkey or Qatar in the early years. So Jabhat al-Nusra, Jabhat al-Fatah al-Sham, now Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham. Think about it, Russian, there were more than like 30, 40, 50 Syrian rebel factions, right? Now there remains maybe 5 or 6, and the biggest, most largest, and most effective fighting force amongst the Syrian rebel faction, whether we like it or not, whether people want to acknowledge it or not, is Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham and the Syrian National Army backed by Turkey.
Now, obviously, this is a wanted man in the West. Yeah. You know, his group's designated. That's been made very, very clear. I think from the Muslim world perspective, the question about him, his group, and others, opposition groups in Syria, is kind of a trust issue. Can we trust these groups? Have they changed? Have they reformed? Who's really backing them? Who's behind them? One thing that I think we should address is this claim that, okay, the offensive may have come now at this time because maybe Israel's involved in that. Maybe it's a Turkey-Israel deal. Maybe the US has offered Julani a chance. Well, look, we'll officially adopt you in some way or form. We'll take you off the designation list, but you've got to act now. Do your offensive, undermine Iran. These are the types of accusations that are being thrown around on.
And they are accusations.
Yeah, absolutely. Accusations of all types. I mean, what do you guys think about this? Is Israel involved? Is it just Turkey? Are these guys semi-autonomous? Is this totally on their initiative? This is the kind of questions that are flowing around. Perhaps this is just something they did themselves, you know, without, maybe they surprised Turkey even, as well as everyone else.
Roshan, what do you think?
Yeah, and I think a lot of the Sunnis that have been talking to me behind the scenes over the past week or so find the timing suspicious, and it does raise questions. You know, a ceasefire happens in Lebanon and this starts. No, I think the rebels are basically just saying that we took advantage of Hezbollah's weakness, Iran's weakness. Yeah, so that's what they say. They said there's no Israeli involvement, but we just literally took advantage of their weakness. But yeah, a lot of people are saying, is this the right time to do it when, literally the Ummah is trying to be as united as possible in the fight against Israel, a critical juncture where the resistance axis in particular seems to be on the back foot now after the ceasefire in Lebanon, after the abandonment effectively of Gaza. I don't know. I think largely it probably does suit Israel in a way. I'm sure. I mean, I've been looking at Israeli media. We did an article on it on Five Pillars a few days ago, where we were looking at Israeli media, what they were saying, what analysts were saying, think tanks. Overall, I think the Israelis are happy because they want their aim is now, they've delinked Lebanon from Gaza, and Netanyahu said he wanted to focus on Iran and the resistance axis. So this looks like another way of weakening the resistance axis, and especially that land link between Iran, Syria and Hezbollah, so supplying Hezbollah. On the other hand, I think it is also clear from looking at Israeli analysts, they're concerned about Jabhat al-Nusra, Hit Tahrir al-Sham, because of their ideology. They're obviously not friendly to Israel, and they feel that in the future, they might cause a bit of chaos now, but if they take over the whole of Syria, then that's a headache for Israel. And also they could get hold of chemical weapons and stuff like that, which are in Syria at the moment. So there's pros and cons for Israel. But I would say, looking at it dispassionately, I think I would say it's probably a win for Israel at the moment. It does certainly weaken the fight against against Israel, especially. And let's face it, I think even you would admit, Dilly, that it wasn't Sunni nations fighting Israel, was it? Or Sunni militias. The only ones that were firing any shots whatsoever were Hezbollah and the resistance axis, even though it wasn't enough from many people's point of view.
Yeah, sure. So a possible win for Israel is what you're saying.
There's one thing I would say is I think Israel did say that during the first war, from 2011 to 2020, there was a point where Israel actually, now I'm not sure whether this was this misinformation, but Israeli officials did admit basically helping Jabhat al-Nusra fighters in the south by giving them medical care. They said that they treated some of them in Israeli hospitals. That is the only direct link I can see between Jabhat al-Nusra, HTS and Israel. I think it's a well-established fact as well. I think it's not denied. But in terms of other links, I don't see any. I think it's more kind of conspiracy theories.
Okay, fine. Dilly, what do you make of it?
In terms of the timing of it, I don't think the Syrian rebels have made any secret about the timing of it, or that the fact that they've taken advantage of a weakness that they've seen in Hezbollah's recent military engagement with Israel. And why would they? The killers of their people are the axis of resistance. They don't see Iran and Hezbollah and Bashar as an axis of resistance. They see them as an axis of oppression. That's the point here. So if you put yourself in the shoes of many Syrians, many Sunni Syrians, but Syrians generally, I'm sorry, but they don't see the axis of resistance as an axis of resistance. They're killers. At the end of the day, when it all kicked off, right? It was equally in the same way that foreign fighters had come via Turkey. There were also Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps. There were Hezbollah fighters. There were mercenaries from Afghanistan and Pakistan. There were Iraqi militias. So this whole argument about the rebels are filled with foreign entities, but somehow Bashar and his axis aren't. That's untrue. So I don't expect Syrians, with all due respect to anyone else, to put, even from a selfish point of view, their situation before that of what's happening in Gaza. Gaza's been happening for a year. Syria's been happening for 13 years. It's very hard to convince or argue with a Syrian who sees Hezbollah, Iran, Bashar, the Russians in a particular way, let alone as an axis of resistance and liberators of Al-Aqsa. So, and in terms of like aid and assistance, it got to a point where from my reading and understanding, that Bashar eventually became the lesser evil, even for Western powers. In 2015, during the G7 summit, that was the general sentiment of all the G7 members, that it's better we have Bashar, the devil you know, than the devil you don't know. That's one of the reasons why America couldn't really secure a proper base amongst the Syrian rebel factions, because whenever they did fund them, whenever they did arm them, the more moderate factions, whatever that is, whether it's the Kurds or other kind of Sunni, more moderate factions, the fact of the matter is, whether it was done intentionally or unintentionally, and money and funding got to the more hardcore elements, whether it be Jabhat al-Nusra or other groups, it was because on the ground, the ones that were actually making huge gains, right, was these factions, not the ones that the Americans were backing, whether indirectly or directly. So eventually Bashar became a case where he was the lesser evil. Remember, Western nations never intervened in Syria to remove Bashar. They intervened to bomb ISIS. Do you remember when there was a vote in Parliament and how many of Obama's red lines were crossed? They never intervened. They never
intervened directly militarily, but they did obviously intervene in terms of supplying military hardware to the rebels and
certain
money
factions,
and,
factions,
Yeah.
and obviously via their own proxy states as well, whether it be the Gulf states. Or
I think they did want Bashar to fall at the beginning, and they felt the momentum was that way. But I think for the West and Israel, after a while, it was the best case scenario was everyone fighting each other. So they didn't want anyone to prevail. They didn't want Assad to prevail completely or the rebels to prevail completely. And I think that would be their best case scenario again, that everyone's fighting each other and then no one's thinking about Palestine whatsoever.
So do you think that the Palestinian cause is being harmed with this offensive? I know you justified, well, you didn't justify, you said why it's happening, but do you think it is actually affecting the Palestinian cause at the moment?
not in any serious major way.
Really?
Yeah.
So you don't get the idea of if they undermine this axis of a crescent, that it's stopping the only group fighting?
Different axes can emerge. We need to move beyond this assumption that whether it's the axis of resistance or any other country, these are nation states.
But that'll take a while to emerge, won't it, Billy? I mean, at the moment, the resistance axis is the only game in town, right?
And perhaps there needs to be new players in the scene, and things need to change and move and shift. Even how many people were frustrated with the level of defense that was given by the axis?
But what you're effectively saying is that's an end to the war now. That Israel has won. For now, you know, the Muslims, the Ummah has lost. We regroup, things shift around, and then we go again in a few years. Is that what you're saying?
Potentially, Israel won't stop on Gaza. You think Israel's going to stop in Gaza? If it's Gaza now, and then it'll be somewhere else next. So this issue with Israel isn't for this moment and this time now. This struggle's been happening for over 70 years, and still Aqsa is occupied. Quds is occupied. So I'm saying that this struggle isn't one that's restricted to one group or one axis. What I'm saying is that I don't think it will significantly deter Israel from executing its plans for Gaza and elsewhere as a result of the events in Syria. I don't believe it will.
I think it is, although some will acknowledge the credit that Iran has been hitting shots for Gaza, Syria isn't really one that's been hitting shots for Gaza at all, has it? I mean, they talk about
it's been a transit route. It's been a transit route.
but that's not really enough to justify, let's say, oh, the Syrians should delay an offensive, because ultimately the Syrians want freedom, right? So for us to say, well, Iran's doing something, so maybe they should have left it another year, I don't see that as a legit point.
Also, when you hear people say, "Oh, why didn't the Syrian rebels ever fire a shot in Gaza?" Have you looked at a map of Syria? Have you looked at who controls the borders of the Golan Heights? Who actually has proximity to Israel to carry out an attack? Sure, it's a transit route, but if people are going to like to discredit arguments for the rebels, is that, oh, well, where were you when we needed you for the last 12, 13 months? Well, look at a map. They're not in the proximity, they're not next to the Golan Heights or bordering Israel or Palestine to contribute to that. Judge them on that if they ever reach there and have the capability that Bashar did.
Yeah, I just think that the Assad regime is well past its sell-by date, even from a resistance axis point of view. I don't think there are many people that can actually sit there and say, even in the pro-Iran camp, well, Assad's a great guy. I mean, it's an absolute matter of fact that a lot of innocent people have been killed in Syria. And I think the question I'd like to know is, let's say, for example, the offensive continues. Let's say they literally take Homs, Hama, and the Assad regime is right on its last legs. Whether they'll be able to take Damascus or not, I think is very difficult, because I think even the Russians would step in.
And Latakia as well.
Let's say, for example, they succeed to the point where Syria is literally split 50-50. Would there ever be a situation where, for example, Assad would go or do you think he's just cemented there? That's what I want to know. Do you think the Iranians would ever give up on Assad, for example? Because I'm sure
Well,
Turkey's going
I
to push
didn't-
for it. You know, the West is going to push for it, and Iran's on the back foot because of their inability to keep the pressure on Israel now. What do you think?
Well, I didn't think the Iranians would give up on Gaza, but they did. So anything's possible. Obviously, they have the security pact going. Basically, Syria was the only country that helped Iran during the 80s, that war they had with Saddam Hussein's Iraq. And they have a security pact, but I think they've repaid Syria back in spades, quite frankly, for helping them during that war. But, I mean, shall I just kind of lay out my position? Because I think it's important. We haven't really laid out our position yet, and we're already like half an hour into the podcast. So just give me 2 or 3 minutes. I mean, I think it's well known from people who know me. I was more in the resistance Axis camp a few years back, and I have shifted my position since then. I think if you are a believing and practicing Muslim, you just can't stand by Bashar al-Assad. You can justify it to yourself and for pragmatic reasons, but then if you're doing that, what you're doing is you're putting politics before spirituality. And my position has been, I'm a political Muslim, but ultimately my goal is to get to Jannah, and my goal is to obey Allah. And if I'm going to stand in front of my Lord and say I supported Bashar al-Assad, that's a problem. That's literally a problem. So for that reason alone, I don't think a believing and practicing Muslim, whatever sect you are, you know, can support Bashar al-Assad. And the best scenario would be for him to step down, or for something else to happen to him, quite frankly. And but at the same time, I think there are legitimate questions to ask, and I think a lot of Sunnis are doing this. I was saying to Dilly the other day is that during the first war, I would say that 90% of Sunnis were like, you know, or maybe 80% at least, were gung-ho behind the rebels. This time, I think it's less. I think it's still a majority, a clear majority, but I think now people are asking more questions about who's backing them. Is this a power play by a greater power? Are they just pawns in a bigger chess game? And the West has just flicked a switch, you know, and Turkey's flicked a switch, Israel's flicked a switch, Russia, Iran, etc., you know? And, you know, and because of those concerns, this is much bigger than just Bashar against the rebels. It's about the West versus the resistance axis versus Russia. It's about Qatar, you know, it's about there are so many kind of levels to this. And I think we would be doing a disservice to our audience if we didn't explore that, because I think our audience expects a certain level of insight from us. So yes, I think, you know, ideally, I don't think Bashar can or should rule the whole of Syria again. Ultimately, the Syrian people have a right to live without a dictatorship, like we all do. And no matter how much we love Palestine, that remains a fact. However, we have to be very careful about falling into a trap, like we have many times before, like we did in Iraq. You know, a lot of Muslims supported the Western invasion of Iraq, unfortunately. You know, like we did with Libya, like we did many. You know, let's not get played again. And let's try and, you know, what I fear is a return to civil war. I think that's the worst scenario. We've seen 1 million people dead already. Do we want to go down that route again because of our ideological fixations? You know, could this war spread to Lebanon? Because I think ultimately, if the reality is if Hezbollah and Iran are significantly weakened in Syria, then there will be an uprising in Lebanon against Hezbollah, and that would return Lebanon into civil war. So 100% this is going to spread beyond Syria. Or do we try to contain it and get the best possible solution? Can the regional countries do a deal, for example? Can the major powers, who really are the major powers in Syria, Turkey, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, unfortunately the West as well, you know, can they sit down and do a deal and have spheres of influence? And thereby Iranian interests to a certain extent are safeguarded in the south of the country. Turkish kind of interests are safeguarded in the north, etc., etc. And Syrians get to live in a bit of peace, a bit of security. It won't be an ideal situation at all, but at least it won't be bloodshed, unrelenting hatred, which is going to last for generations, all the while with Israel and the West just licking their chops and loving it.
Partition, basically, is a possibility. Not one that tends to work from the past. I know.
Well, the whole Muslim world was divided after the Khilafah fell, right? So it's been the de facto reality. I mean, is Syria even a real country? You know, is Lebanon a real country? These are just lines drawn in the map by Western powers. And are Sunnis really going to be comfortable living with Alawis? Are Sunnis in Syria, even Sunnis in Syria are split to a certain extent between religious Sunnis, secular Sunnis. It's a massively complex situation. And I think often we think of it as rebels versus Bashar. And obviously, if you put it in those terms, you're going to support the rebels, right? Because we hate Bashar and we know who he is. I mean, Bashar, for me, he's not an ideological person. He doesn't have, I think the resistance axis, they have an ideology. So do the rebels. So do so-called Islamists. They have an ideology. Bashar is someone, I think he would change sides depending on his interests. And his current interests reside with Russia and Iran. But if they resided with the West, I think he'd change sides to the West. So he's someone without an ideology. Obviously, he's an Alawi who I think pretends to be a Sunni, but he's an Alawi as well. So from our perspective, they're not even Muslims, I think there's consensus amongst the Sunnis, and I think even the Shias, some Shias don't consider Alawis to be Muslims.
Hafiz al-Assad had to lobby them in the 80s.
How can a population which is about 12% in Syria at most rule over 100% of the country? It can't. It's not a sustainable situation. And I think the resistance axis needs to know that, you can't expect Sunnis especially to follow you if you're going to impose a reality on Syria which is contrary to the desires of the people, It's just not a sustainable situation.
I must admit, to answer my own question, which I threw at you earlier, was would Iran ever, under any circumstance, ditch Assad in order to kind of, cut a deal with Turkey?
I think they might have to.
I don't think they will ever.
Do you know why?
And I'll tell you why. No, go on.
No, I'll be really brief. I think that we didn't think they would abandon Gaza, but they had to because Israel has dealt them so many blows.
That is a good.
So if they're driven into a corner, maybe they would, or maybe there's room for negotiation there, where maybe they can supply some transit routes across the south of the country, and the rebels agree not to compromise that. But I think at the moment everyone is under the apprehension that they can win, and I don't think they can. I don't think the rebels can win. I think that maybe they can take Hama. Maybe they could take Homs or, etc. But I don't think they can take Damascus because I think that would be the red line for Russia and Iran. They wouldn't give up because if they do, then, Iran would put its own defense. It's always had a forward defense since the 80s where it doesn't fight wars on its own soil. It fights them in other countries. And if they gave up Syria, then that would threaten their own borders, I think. So I don't think they give up Damascus, but they might give up the north.
I think the only reason Iran would never abandon Assad at all under any circumstances is because he's the only key reason that gives Iran legitimacy to continue operating in Syria, because he's still the official quote-unquote president of Syria, and he requested Iran to enter. He's their route to so-called legitimacy to militarily intervene in Syria. I think on that basis...
That's just politics, isn't it?
It's very important.
Politics,
Iran already is not recognised. Any of its actions in the region doesn't get recognised as legit, but it needs it because otherwise it has basically no mandate to do anything in Syria, because I think it's fair to say that most Syrians don't want Iran in there. And I think that Assad, if he goes, even from an international legal perspective, they have no argument to make anymore. They'll surrender that only one argument they can make. Why is Iran and its friends in Syria at all? I don't think any Syrians other than the government asked them to go in there. So if Assad goes, then Iran loses that, and then they have no legit.
It's one less argument. But ultimately, if you can't govern your own country without the help of outside powers,
which is what Assad
then you're not legitimate. But at the same time, you can say the rebels are also sponsored by outside powers, and unfortunately, some of those outside powers, in the past anyway, have been the West. So we've got to take these into account. We can't be...
Would you say Bashar would have survived without the help of Iran, Russia and Hezbollah?
No, I think he would have fallen, yes.
He would have fallen, right?
Yes.
So he's not there out of popular support?
I think he has probably about 30% of the population who do support him.
But is that enough for a mandate? Is that enough
for
legitimacy?
Well, it's enough for Keir Starmer in Britain.
Okay.
But
I know. But the truth
but yeah, no. I mean, I've actually deliberately not focused on Syria. for a while now, simply because it's so divisive, and all our attention has been on Palestine, hasn't it? So I'm a little bit out of touch, I admit it, but I think my assessment maybe a couple of years ago would be about Bashar has about 20 to 30% hardcore support amongst the population. Secular Sunnis, Alawites, obviously, maybe some Christians, Druze, etc. And I would have said maybe about 50% of the population would be against. I would say that the population against him would have probably been about 60% or more than that. However, half of those that are against him probably just don't want war. So they may say, look, there's no point pursuing a war because we can't win at this moment. So let's have a truce, etc. And then maybe about 30% would be hardcore. No, we got to fight till the end. So that's where I would see the division. I'm not sure whether you agree with that, Dilly.
I just believe that if Bashar was as popular or has as a mandate or traction as he did, he wouldn't have survived up until now without foreign help. Iran has kept him alive, Russian air power has kept him alive, Hezbollah manpower has kept him alive. In the absence of those three things, there would be no Bashar. It can also be argued in the absence of material help from Turkey and other countries, many of the rebel factions wouldn't be operating. And and that's the case. But look, my position is this, bro. And it has always kind of been on the side of revolution and regime. I don't like the term regime change because that resonates with Western operations and Western agendas. But the Arab Spring itself was an optimistic period for the Muslim Ummah, was it not, Roshan?
For a while, yeah, and then it turned bad. Yeah.
But were we not all excited?
At the beginning, I thought it was the end of the American Empire.
That's what everyone thought. This was the end of Pax Americana, the dawn of an Islamic awakening. How is it that Iran and Press TV themselves described every uprising during the Arab Spring as Islamic awakening? Apart from Syria. How? They supported the uprising against Hosni Mubarak. The Press TV officially called it Islamic awakening. They called the same in Tunisia, same in Yemen, same in Bahrain, same in Libya. Every single country was described as an Islamic awakening by Iran itself until Syria happened. I'll let everyone draw their own conclusions with regards to that. Now, what I want to posit, besides agreeing with Roshan, that Syrians have a right to return home. They just like the Palestinians, just like the Kashmiris, just like everyone, they have a right to return home and not live under tyranny. That is something that Allah has endowed on all Muslims, Syrian or non-Syrian, Palestinian or not. Muslims, as any other human being, have a right to not live under tyranny and oppression. But I want to posit this, and this will kind of be not me stating my position, but the questions I want to kind of ask the kind of Axis of Resistance supporters, those on the left and anti-imperialists. Why is it that the bombing of hospitals and civilian infrastructure in Gaza is condemnable, but it's not when it's in Syria in front of your own eyes? Why is Israel killing Palestinians in Gaza and West Bank okay, but when Bashar killed Palestinians in Yarmouk was somehow excusable? If the Arab Spring was the CIA Western plot, then Iran itself supported many of the uprisings, right, Roshan, to begin with? Right? Why are Sunni Islamists okay in Palestine, but not okay in Syria? They're still masked, because Hamas is an offshoot of Ikhwan al-Muslimin in Gaza, of the Muslim Brotherhood. Some of the key players in the Syrian rebel factions are also Ikhwan al-Muslimin of Syria. So why are they noble resistance fighters in one area, but Ikhwani, Takfiri, Wahhabi, NATO agents in the other? They're literally the same people ethnically, racially, ideologically, right? Not all the Syrian rebels, but a significant element of the Syrian rebel factions are of the same ideology of Hamas, right? The rebel factions are all foreigners. I've already mentioned the list of foreigners that are fighting for Bashar. Whether you want to say it's upon invitation or not, that we can have that debate. But the point is there's foreigners fighting on both sides. Why resort to the same labels as the Zionists? Why resort, even people that we've interviewed on our platform, why resort to the same labels, jihadists, Salafis, head choppers, Al-Qaeda, ISIS?
About this in depth later. Yeah.
How is that fair? How is that after 13 months of being our allies and comrades for the cause of Palestine, boom, overnight, something happens in Syria, Takfiri, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, a brother whom we know, a prominent podcaster, was labelled by someone else, a prominent pro-Palestine, anti-Zionist academic, as Al-Qaeda and ISIS. How is that acceptable? How can it be that
lead to an arrest.
That can lead to an arrest. And then we have the likes of Craig Murray who tweeted saying that, oh, in the same way that you can report Hamas supporters to the police, you can report people who support the Syrian rebels to the police, right? Where is the moral consistency in that?
This is the same guy that a lot of Muslims wanted to be MP of Blackburn, by the way. But
why don't the rebels go to Gaza? Well, look at the map of Syria, right? And see how is it possible for these rebels to get to Golan Heights when all those lands and borders are in the Assad areas, right? Bashar was hailed as and championed as a reformer by the West initially. He was complicit in illegal rendition. He engaged with the CIA. Many people were tortured in Syria. Is he a sellout, an imperialist for engaging with the CIA?
By the way, he had tea and biscuits with the Queen. By the way, he had a state visit in about 2010 or something.
Just a year or two, like a year or two before it all kicked off. Iran fought alongside US and NATO at least on one non-military operation in Herat in 2001. Iran fought alongside the US in Iraq against ISIS. The Assad regime works alongside the Kurdish factions who are also backed and funded by America. So who is the axis of resistance? Who is the imperialist? Who's the anti-imperialist? There needs to be just some moral consistency.
Dilly, can I ask you, because I've laid out my position and I've said maybe the best scenario might be a carve up of Syria. I know what your ideal solution is, but what do you think would be a responsible desire for the Ummah to look towards? Because I think your ideal income means civil war for Syria again, 2.0, and the spreading of war beyond Syria's borders. That's why I would probably be against a rebel advance to Damascus, because I just think it would ignite something much bigger. What's your take on it?
I would want the Syrian rebel factions, whomever have popular mandate amongst the Syrian people, to inshallah take the whole of Syria. There's no two ways about that.
That's what you want?
That's what I want, yes. Of course I want that.
But do you think that's something that the Ummah should support, given what I just said?
The death and destruction is something, it's neither here or there from the perspective that we simply don't know what is ahead of us. We don't know how things will pan out. And let's also be honest, Roshan, yeah? If we look at critical junctures in the Ummah's history, victory from Allah comes at the most bloodiest periods of our history. That the very term fitna or fitan, it means a cleansing process. It means there is a process of bloodletting in the ummah where we become a worthy ummah of victory. Now that's all romanticism and kind of like ultra optimism based on theology and and that kind of stuff. But the point of the matter is we simply don't know how many people will die, and whether Syrians themselves believe that that's a price worth paying for to not live under Bashar.
Well, it was at least 500,000 last time, probably more than that.
Horrific numbers.
And obviously millions displaced. You see, that's what I have foremost in my mind, and I just don't think the rebels can do that. They can probably take the north of the country max, but if they try to go any further, I think they'll be stopped by Iran and Russia, who ultimately do still monopolize the air. Now, unless Turkey suddenly says we're going to impose no-fly zones or something like that, that could be a game changer. But then does Turkey want to really go to war with Russia, have that close proximity? I don't know. I just don't want the Ummah to go through a Syrian civil war 2.0 because we clearly saw what happened last time, and that benefited nobody.
Just on the point of
what makes you think it's going to be different the second time around?
We don't know, but of course it's going to be different.
But you're willing to risk it?
No, I'm not willing to risk it. It's upon the Syrians to risk it. That's the truth of the matter. We can do analysis and talk about it in the comfort of our seats in the West, but the truth of the matter is it's not our sons and our fathers and our daughters that will be sacrificed for this cause. It will be the Syrians. If the Syrians believe that that's a price worth paying for, then it's a price worth paying for to not live under tyranny and injustice. Whether we believe it to be the correct thing or not. How many Syrians have I spoken that believe that all those lives were lost in vain? Look, let's be honest. Let's put aside what Bashar and his forces, his allies, did in Syria. Let us as Sunnis have some introspection. Yeah. Besides the dhulm upon the Syrians, who betrayed the Syrians themselves? It was Sunni states. Yeah, Turkey, Qatar, all these countries that initially funded them, gave them weapons.
They weren't willing to finish the job.
They weren't willing to finish the job, and why? Because certain orders came from America when their foreign policy and geopolitical interests weren't aligning. When they realized that actually Bashar may be better, because because he's the devil that we know. He's a problem and a thorn, but it's better to engage with him than a bunch of Sunni Islamist rebels that we can't control, right? And the moderate factions aren't even that kind of like powerful. So really the Sunni countries betrayed the Syrians. The Syrian rebels betrayed the Syrians because of their infighting, because their internal differences, their infighting. So there has to be some introspection amongst Sunni Syrians. If they believe that this is a price paying for, then it's on them to do it. And they will seek whatever material help, Roshan. In the same way that the Uyghurs, I'm sure, do not want to cuddle up to the neocons of America. But because the Muslim Ummah has abandoned them, we've handed the Uyghurs over to the West. And we've realized in the last 100 years, brothers, agree with me or not, Roshan, that whenever an oppressed or occupied part of the Muslim world resorts to one of the global powers who all have blood on their hands, Russia has blood on its hands, America has blood on its hands, I'm talking about Muslim blood, is that they are forced into the hands of these powers because they've been abandoned by the Muslim nations. So my position is that if the Syrians believe that but the price to pay to live under justice and freedom away from Bashar, and that a full advance and an offensive to take Damascus and the entirety of the country is something that they want to do, they should do it.
I'm sure they want to do it. I've only been to Syria once and for a brief period of time, so I'm certainly far from an expert. But what I did notice when I was there, and after reading about it as well, is that it's such a diverse country. So when you say Syrians, what do we mean? Do we mean religious Sunni Syrians? Do we mean Christians? Do we mean secular Syrians? Do we mean Druze? Do we mean Alawites? So I think the notion of one...
Syrian Sunnis, when I talk about Syrians, I'm generally talking about that main demographic that rose up against Bashar, and that was Syrian Sunnis.
Yes, but unfortunately, a lot of Syrian Sunnis, also secular Syrian Sunnis, support Bashar and are intrinsic to his regime, you know, and some of the richest men in, what's his name, I can't remember his name, Rami something, he's the richest man in Syria, Sunni, you know. I don't know, Dilly, I just think that, I think, obviously we have these discussions.
Do you expect Syrians
10 years ago.
Do you expect Syrians to see Iran, Hezbollah, Bashar and Russia any other way?
Oh no.
They can never be heroes.
I've talked to. I'm in contact with.
We both
lots
are
of Syrians, Sunnis, both from Lebanon and there's a hatred there born out of the blood that has been spilled, and I remember Daniel H wrote an article yesterday, what I thought was quite a balanced article about the situation in Syria, and I sent it to a Sunni Lebanese friend. And he was absolutely outraged because he's like, who the hell is, you know, kind of, I think obviously their worldview is conditioned by the blood that has been spilt in their neighborhood. So they look at us in the West sitting in our comfortable armchairs, analyzing, and they don't take us seriously. But yeah.
Just some concluding thoughts from me, right? I think a starting point to converse with those that we disagree with on Syria has to start on certain things. This is just my view. If we can't even start on these premises, then it's hard to have any conversation. Number one, Bashar is a tyrant. If you can't begin with that, there's going to be no conversation. If you believe Bashar is a hero, someone who should be praised and championed and lionized as a defender of Palestine and an anti-imperialist, you're never gonna. It's just not gonna start. The conversation is not gonna start. If we can't agree on the fact that displaced Syrians, have the right to return home, then there can't be a conversation. If we can't agree that the West, mainly the US, has its hands and tentacles in practically every major Muslim country, would we agree, Roshan? In some way or another, the Americans have their tentacles in pretty much every single country, and the nature of nation-state politics, brothers and sisters, is that it's a very, very messy affair. No one truly really knows what's happening behind closed doors and what deals are being made and who's stabbing who in the back. If you look at Turkey has either played a masterful brush of politics, or it has just done a kamikaze strategy. Only time will tell.
Don't you find it ironic that Turkey, they didn't do anything against Israel, didn't they, for the last year, but they intervene in a big way in Syria? Yeah.
Look, some would argue, the Sunni idealists, not that I say idealists, they'll say that, look, let's put Erdogan aside, let's put this aside. The march to Al-Aqsa and Quds starts with Halab, and Salahuddin had to liberate Syria and Egypt before he took it. Now, just because the axis of resistance for now have been the only line or semblance of military resistance, that doesn't mean they're going to be the only guys in the block, or that a new block cannot emerge, or something different may emerge in years to come, because it has experienced major blows from Israel, has it not?
Oh yeah, it has to recover now.
It has to
over a
recover now.
longer
We
period
don't
of
know
time.
what's going to emerge in the coming years. We simply don't know. I don't know who said it, but someone said you can have 10 years of inaction and 10 days of action where things simply literally change.
What I would say is that the liberation of Palestine cannot come at the expense of the Syrian people. And I think from a resistance axis point of view, that is their attitude and ideology, that Syrians should just shut up and put up with Bashar because our focus is Palestine. But yeah, one part of the Ummah can't come at the expense of another. You know, we're in this together.
And not when they're in that proximity of Bilad al-Sham. They're literally one people. The people, Palestinians, Lebanese, and Syrians are one people. Forget the borders. They are literally the people of Asham. They're Levantine Muslims. So like they're from the same tribes and same connections. They lived side by side for centuries before these borders were drawn. So like when we talk about Palestine al-Aqsa and its sanctity, Asham also has religious significance in terms of Islamic eschatology, in terms of verses of the Quran and Hadith about Syria, and that's why Syria is nearly as dear to the hearts of many Muslims as Palestine. That's why it's so sensitive.
You're an idealist, I think. I'm more of a pragmatist, and I think that's the difference in our views when we talk about this. But I mean, I think we should talk about the online infighting, but maybe we should end by, because I think a lot of viewers will watch this looking for answers, and maybe they'll have more questions than answers. So I think we should end, perhaps, sorry, it's your podcast, isn't it? But
No.
I was going to suggest to you that we should end by perhaps, just giving the viewers some advice. What should they think? Who should they support?
It's easy, stay on the side of justice and against oppression.
That's a cop-out though, isn't it?
How is it a cop-out? How is it a cop-out?
Well, I mean, that's just a general phrase.
Is Bashar a tyrant?
Absolutely.
Is Bashar an oppressor?
Yes.
Has he killed his own people?
Yes.
Is he someone that Islam would tell us to align and support?
No.
Okay, so then don't be on his side.
But is there a greater evil? That's the debate.
Okay, well, but is it for us as non-Syrians to decide that? For us to tell Syrians who is the greater evil when they know who have killed them, who decimated their towns, who killed their families, who widowed them, who gave them orphans? They know that it's not the Chinese. They know it's not They know it's the Russians and Bashar. So
That's the one factor I think that brings every people of different opinion together, is that Assad should go. He should have gone a long time ago.
But do you understand? It's not a cop. You just don't side on the side of oppression. Now,
But I think we need to have honest conversations about, well, what do we actually physically do for Syria, as well as that, because I think one elephant in the room which we haven't really addressed is that, okay, so Assad is in power because Iran and Russia intervened to save him, and he doesn't have a mandate. And I mean, it looks like now that Iran and Russia are busy elsewhere, Ukraine and Lebanon, his regime is now falling to bits again. So he's going to need them to come back to save him. So let's say, for example, the Iran issue. How are we going to address that in order to get Assad out of the way? Because Iran won't let Assad go. Why won't they let him go? It's not just the boundary issue. I think that there are many Shia, even Shia that perhaps we could have a conversation with about Syria, who will admit, okay, Assad is a tyrant. He is killing people. We recognize he has Sunni blood on his hands, but we're worried that if we...
have you met any like that?
Yeah, a lot of
I need to
a lot of Shia genuinely believe that if Assad falls, there will be a massive genocide or purge of Shia in Damascus and in Syria, and that the opposition is very sectarian and that it's basically all the same. ISIS, Daesh, and all these groups are all the same. And obviously, we can argue against that, whether it's true or not, but the fact is it's widely believed in Shia circles, and that Iranian-backed narrative of they're all Daesh has deep roots.
Very similar to when Zionists
So-
accuse everyone of being Hamas or ISIS as well.
So what
You
do we
can't
do?
you can't paint everyone like this.
So how do we address, because the sectarian issue in Syria is huge.
It is.
It has always been that case, and even now I
Yeah.
think it's flaring up again. So how do we address this sectarianism? Because if Shia run away with the idea that if we lose Assad, Shia are going to get annihilated, so we have to die fighting to prop up this nasty tyrant, then
This is why there has to be a negotiation.
it looks like the Syrian civil war will go on forever, basically. That's what it looks like to me. And I mean, you talk about partitioning and negotiating.
This is why I have a very practical solution is that...
How do we address
Do you
that?
support the Balkanization of Syria, really?
No, obviously, I
That's
don't.
bad.
I don't, but it's like we're not dealing with ideal situations here, Dilly. What we're trying to do is stop the region... Sorry.
But Balkanization, you know, giving the north to the Turks and the Kurds and giving the south to the...
Yeah.
That's not an ideal situation.
Partitioning never works.
That never works. Further
Yeah.
partitioning of existing colonial borders, how could that ever work?
Lebanon's a mess, Iraq's a mess. They're all partitioned up, aren't they?
Try to see the Syrian conflict away from sectarian lens. It'll be tainted by sectarianism, no doubt, because of how deeply embedded sectarian tensions and narratives and ideologues influenced the Syrian war or the revolution, right? But the point is, try to see it from the perspective of justice and injustice. I'm not appealing to Muslims now, yeah? Now, as for Shia Muslims, if you feel that there's going to be a genocide or an ethnic cleansing of your people in Syria, this is just scaremongering. It's scaremongering. And to
So
basically...
you believe that if
Take
Assad
that
falls,
your
they
word. They won't take the word of Sunnis for that.
And that's just Syria for you then. That's what Syria does. Syria polarizes discussion. It makes people's idealists, romanticists, pragmatists, because Syria means that much. It is the global chessboard. It's the one revolution or uprising that even till today, many Sunnis in the deepest depths of their heart still have warm aspirations that some hope and victory will come from Syria. It's that type of conflict. It's a conflict and revolution that's it's existential to Iran and the resistance of Axis. Is it not, Roshan?
Yeah, they feel it is, yes.
So
Yes.
it's pretty much existential from all the camps involved. And we're not even getting into like the Western, NATO, Israel, and all the other different players. The only thing I can advise people, right, if Shia Muslims are not going to believe what I've got to say or trust me, fine, okay. But to the Muslims, the Sunni Muslims, I'll say this: just be on the side of justice and never be on the side of oppression. And I don't think it's that, at least from my perspective, I don't think it's that skewed or tainted in Syria. You can very well know who is responsible for the most death and destruction, who has the air power, who has the capability and ability to turn Syria into rubble, who is responsible for most of the deaths and the displacements. Just don't be on their side.
I do think that Iran has dug itself into a massive hole in Syria, and it's never going to recover from that.
No, I mean its reputation certainly will never recover amongst Sunni Muslims.
Not for generations.
Not for
And
generations, at least.
If they keep backing Assad, never, absolutely never.
Yeah,
And I think Iran, can it ask itself that honest question? Can we ever allow a situation to happen? And I think with the sectarian issue ongoing, the answer will be no to that. So I think
but that's
the big
what
element.
I'm saying. Politics is the art of compromise, and in reality, that's how the world works, right? No one gets what they want. They just try and get as much as they can, you know. And that's why I'm saying that if Iran is going to be persuaded to pull away from Bashar al-Assad, their interests have to be safeguarded to a certain extent, their security interests. Otherwise, they won't do it.
What do you make of Bashar, of Saudi voicing support for Bashar, UAE voicing support for Bashar, him cozying up to the Arab League?
It's a change of policy,
It's a change of policy,
from
isn't it?
Saudi and UAE, because they were the two main backers of different factions in Syria, especially Saudi Arabia. They poured huge amounts of monies and weapons into the rebel factions. I think they just got used to. I think this caught everyone by surprise.
Because it's normalised now.
We got used to the status quo that Bashar had won and the conflict was frozen with just a few rebels in the north and nothing was happening, you know. So I think Saudi had already determined a policy, but we know very well that policy might change. You know, Arabs. When I used to live in the Arab world, I think a few of my friends said that Arabs they tend to kind of go with the wind. If the wind is blowing and the momentum is blowing a certain way, then they will change policy. And I'm sure Saudi Arabia will.
Can we all at least agree that the nature of nation-state politics is dirty? So much khiyana and treachery. We will never know what's being signed or agreed behind closed doors. What conversations are taking place? There's so much that we don't know. So anyone claiming that they know exactly what's happening in Syria, they're BSing, because they don't. Because there's so many different players and stakeholders involved, right? You got the Turks and the Kurdish issue, You've got Iran's supply transit route to Hezbollah. You've got the Russian interest there countering America in the region. You've got so many different factions. You've got ideologues who want to see an Islamic state in Syria. You've got so many different factions and players on the ground. What are Afghans and Pakistanis doing fighting in Syria on both sides? Do you understand? That's the kind of...
And there must be so much infiltration by intelligence agencies as well.
That's the kind, and some of it's not even a secret. The fact that foreign intelligence services or state actors are involved, that's not even a secret. So that's how complex Syria is. Anyone, including ourselves, if we ever claim to know everything about Syria, never believe us, because it's that complex. It's one of the most complex conflicts in modern history.
Should we get onto the online infighting? Because obviously, I mean, I've not been commenting much, neither of you really, over the past week.
I've been posting a few videos and photos.
I've obviously been monitoring how the coalition that had built up around Palestine has spectacularly fallen apart.
Yeah.
And basically, if you say anything anti-rebel, or even question the rebels and their funding and whatever, you're basically an Assadist, pro-Bashar, genocide supporter. If you say anything mildly not even pro-Bashar, but maybe pro-resistance Axis and pro-Palestine, then, you know, it's the other extreme. You're Al-Qaeda, or I don't know what it is.
Al-Qaeda, ISIS, Takfiri, NATO, head chopping, whatever.
So it's been a toxic debate. I've been trolled. Lots of people have been trying to poke me like into a bit of a reaction and stuff like that. But this is our reaction today. What have you made of it?
I've been getting trolled a little bit. Look, guys, Roshan, I've always been pretty consistent on Syria, right? I would probably say, alhamdulillah, you've shown more movement in your position than I have mine. And I've been speaking on Syria since 2011, 12, 13, from the very early years. It's all there in multiple publications. I interviewed these people for specific reasons. Now, all of a sudden, there's infighting between some of the people that I've mentioned and others on the pro-Palestine camp who, for most part of 30 months, worked together. We've got David Miller firing shots at Baba Mohammed Jalal from Thinking Muslim. You've got Craig Murray talking about reporting Syrian rebel supporters to the police.
He's got a history of reporting people to the police, hasn't he?
Yeah. we've got,
I don't know. Have we gone public on that? Oh, let's not. We'll move on.
Then we've got all the grey. Then we've got all the Grey Zone guys, Mondo Wise guy, Mint Press guys who people were sharing lots of their content, but now they're getting blasted. Yeah, it's just popping off, isn't it? And that's the nature of Syria. Syria has that effect.
It's horrible. I hate it. There was a bit of a cooling off period, wasn't there, over the last year? That's one of the best things about the last year, is that there's been this wide coalition of Muslims, even non-Muslims, for the cause of Palestine. That seems to have spectacularly fallen apart. I am still a bit down because I think that Israel definitely has the upper hand now, and I think that is clear for everyone to see. And the infighting in Syria seems to be like another death knell for that. So I think...
but I don't care too much about the infighting with white Western lefties. I'll just be honest with you, bro. Honestly, I couldn't...
I'm not bothered by that either.
I couldn't care less what my leftist anti-imperialist allies who are non-Muslims and Westerners tell me about what I should be backing on. And they shouldn't even be telling Muslims, because that's also an imperialistic trait. Why do you feel that you need to tell Muslims and people of colour what their politics should be? Because it doesn't fit it's not, palatable to your version of imperialism and anti-imperialism. I'm sorry, I'm not. So the infighting there, I couldn't care less. But the infighting amongst Muslims is unfortunate. It is unfortunate. It's always sad to see. Yeah. It's sad to see Syrians and some Palestinians having it off on X. But again, I don't think, for me at least, it's hard to work out what side is the side of oppression and injustice in Syria. Just who has the most blood on their hands, and try not to back them.
I mean, even from a Shia perspective, I mean, isn't the whole faith about, basically Imam Hussein and how they abandon Imam Hussein at his moment of need, and don't kind of side with injustice and stand against the tyrant.
No, but the rebels are the side of Yazid. That's what they would say, isn't it? That's what they would say. The framing of that is...
Bashar's certainly not... Yeah.
Oh, no.
I don't even want to finish that sentence.
Yeah. But look, the point of the matter is Syria is messy. It always is messy. And it's messy because there's so many different stakeholders and factions involved with vested interests. But I just believe that the Syrians have a right to not live under tyranny, a right that all Muslims have, that Allah ordained on us. And the liberation and the victory of Palestine and Jerusalem and Al-Aqsa can't be at the expense of Syrians, who are practically the same people. They're the people of Bilad al-Sham.
People of Sham, yeah.
Yeah, we're not talking about a completely different alien nation miles away like Kashmiris or Uyghurs. They're literally the same people. You know, before 1924, 1921, before Sykes-Picot, there was no Syria, there was no Lebanon. This was just Asham. There were governorates and wilayats of the Ottoman state. These were people without one people. But yeah, I mean. Yeah.
So we managed to have a discussion about Syria without like coming to blows, even though we have different opinions, maybe. So maybe the Ummah can follow that example. I don't know.
They should just have the engagements in a brotherly way, and you don't. At the end of the day, if you're in the UK, you're gonna have to live with your neighbours, live with your brothers, live with your friends and family. So there's no point falling out over it, and just have your engagements in a respectful, in a brotherly way, and try and move away from conspiracy theorists. Whilst you might be an idealist and have ideal aspirations and hopes for Syria, also be realistic that things come at a price. Revolution, liberation, all comes at a price, and that price is usually death and destruction.
There were a few questions online. Should we take them just to finish it off really quickly? Maybe you two can chat for a little bit while I find the questions, inshallah.
Yeah. No, I think it's a healthy viewpoint. It's just like you said, the Muslim infighting that worries me so much. Exactly as you said. I think that the weird thing about like left-wing white Western arguments is they hate all opposition blanketly because things like, oh, they want to install Sharia in Syria. And I mean, like, no, like, that's not the issue here, do you know what I mean?
No, but if that's fine, but you're okay with Hamas doing that in Gaza though, right? Or Hezbollah doing that in their areas in Lebanon, or the Iranians doing that. So you're okay with one type of Sharia and Islamism, and you're not okay with the other.
Exactly, or they.
Sorry, go on. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, or they dodge it. To promote these groups for their own selfish reasons. But
can we? This is a question. I'm going to keep all these questions anonymous because people have asked me to do that. Can we support the resistance on the one hand, yet oppose Hezbollah in Syria at the same time?
Yes. Why can't you do that?
Really?
How can you not? It is so easy to do, because there is a greater enemy based on geographic proximity. What's happening between Israel and Lebanon and Israel and Palestine is one issue, and what the resistance or those who are fighting Israel are doing in Syria is a complete different issue. And you should be able to say
they're not linked.
They're not. No, they could be linked, but it's about if you support one there, you don't have to support the other there. It doesn't have to be like that, because then you'd have to assume that they'd have to be right on every issue and wrong on every issue.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with what you said.
They can be right on this front and be absolutely wrong in that front.
This is from a fellow Sunni, practicing Sunni Muslim. Is there a valid argument that though Assad is most certainly a tyrant, now isn't the time to remove him, as it will inevitably strengthen the hand of Israel and exacerbate their genocidal campaign?
I'll let you answer that.
So now, do you want to answer it? It's not the time to remove him.
I think that the argument that Assad being in Syria strengthens Israel is not strong enough to hold water anymore, because the last year or more that we've seen Gaza getting attacked relentlessly by Israel, I haven't seen the Assad regime do anything meaningful at all. I mean, the idea that, oh, well, they're supplying arms and they're keeping these groups going, well, that's not enough. That's far from enough. I mean, we criticize, like, let's say Saudi Arabia, oh, you haven't listed a damn finger for Gaza. Well, at least politically, at least with money they have, at least they are talking about it. I mean, I haven't even heard.
Syria has been attacked in the last 13 months as well.
Yeah, I haven't heard anything. Syria doesn't even protect its own airspace from Israel. Now they're talking about would Assad cut a deal with Israel to save its skin? Yeah. I don't know how true that is, but it's being discussed. I just think that this is a regime that only wants to hold on to power because this guy who's in a privileged position wants to remain a dictator. It's as simple as that. And I think even Iran and their allies need to reach a conclusion eventually that this guy's got to go. And I just think that the idea that Assad remaining means Gaza will be better off. Maybe if Assad was replaced by someone else, Gaza's actually going to be better off in the long run. Yeah. So you talk about long-term strategies, Roshan. maybe we've got to have some change, because right now Gaza is not being liberated. The whole region needs to be started again, probably, in terms of, but then of course people accuse me of backing regime change, so I don't know. But I just think that we may need to see a change before Palestine can be liberated, like Salahuddin had to take over Syria and Egypt.
Radical things happen, brother. Robert, you sound more Sunni than me, bro.
Yes, so Salahuddin dealt with the Shia before moving on to...
Yeah, they did.
I didn't say that, but you
Just a history lesson. Next question. Let's keep these reasonably quick fire. So Turkey was notable in its lack of support for Gaza, even providing access to oil for Israel.
No doubt.
Now it is the main backer of the Syrian rebels. So how should we view Turkey and Erdogan, as an ally or an enemy? Or is it more complicated than that?
It is more complicated than that, but it's a problem for those who put Erdogan in a certain pedestal. If you put him in the pedestal of a modern sultan and a caliph who has that much power and can't do no wrong, then you will have a moral quandary. But if you just see Erdogan as the leader of a secular republic who will put the interests of Turkey first and foremost all the time, every time, then you won't have a problem understanding why he didn't intervene and was even complicit with Israel and its genocide in Gaza, and whereby he's playing a completely different role in Turkey and Syria. Ultimately, he's got millions of Syrians refugees in Turkey. There's a massive growing public opinion against the Syrian refugees. He needs to create a buffer zone. Therefore, he will do what comes first, and that's the interests of the Turkish Republic. If you can just understand that and not treat him as a sultan and not treat him as a caliph, then you won't have these problems. We can absolutely understand his interests in that part of Syria and Turkey, and understand why he's been complicit pretty much and blameworthy with regards to Israel's genocide in Gaza.
So this question I think we've answered. Why didn't the Syrian fighters fire one weapon at Israel? You answered that before.
The context is how?
The role of the West in this current conflict, do you think they've been caught by surprise, or do they have their fingers all over it?
I feel they have. I feel they can be caught off by surprise. Because remember, the West or the US, they're not God. They're not Allah. They don't know every single thing. But generally speaking, they have their tentacles and their fingers on the pulse on most issues. So I don't know how involved or not they were, but given that Turkey is a NATO member, and usually Turkey does tend to inform or give a hint to Washington when it does these kind of things, it's hard to think that they didn't have the slightest of clue that the rebels were going to make this type of offense.
The position of Hamas regarding the Syrian rebels, I think it, just briefly, I'll let you guys come in. I think it's mixed. I think generally, I would say at a ground level, their sympathies would be with the rebels, but at an official level, because obviously they are tied in with the Axis of Resistance, they have maintained a kind of position of neutrality. They were based in Damascus, weren't they? And they left Damascus because of the Syrian war. I know that there was this one, I'm not sure whether he's a Hamas official or not.
Talal Nasser.
I don't think that is the general position of Hamas. I think that's his individual opinion.
But he's the only Hamas official that has spoken on this matter. There's been
since the last few days.
And that was his own position.
I think he's based in Turkey, right?
Based in Turkey, and he basically said that he fully supports the Syrian rebels, they should advance towards Damascus, and that Hamas received $20 million from various Syrian opposition groups over the last 13 months.
Ask Dilly how he can act like he's supporting Palestine while he's supporting Israeli interests in Syria.
Because I don't necessarily believe that the interests or what I want to see in Syria is a plan of Israel. Get over it, man.
Roshan,
how do you marry the fact that Bashar and Bashar used Israeli drones in Syria? Does that make him a Zionist as well? I don't know. Like, people need to just be a bit more morally consistent, man.
Okay, I think there's many more questions here, but we've answered all of them during the.
Any other standout?
Yeah, give me a second to go through it.
That's
Maybe
fine.
you guys can chat. Why can't the Muslim world unite against the common enemy of humanity, the state of Israel? A lot of people just are very despondent that we seem to be fighting again.
Because if you speak to the Muslims of Kashmir and ask them who is their biggest enemy, they're not going to say Israel, they're going to say India. When you speak to the Muslims of Uyghurs and ask them who is your biggest enemy, they're going to say China. If you speak to the Palestinians, they'll say Israelis. And you speak to the Syrians, they'll say Bashar. Or Syrian Sunnis. It's because the biggest enemies of the Ummah isn't one of the same thing. So that's why we can't unite against one single enemy, because there's multiple enemies, many of whom are superpowers with greater capabilities than us. So it's going to take a bigger and wider effort than just unite against one.
Diverting our attention from Palestine while someone's making the point that basically Israel now is trying to create a buffer zone or possibly a place for their settlers to live in the north of Gaza. So you must have heard of Kamal Adwan Hospital in the north.
Yeah.
So there's been the focus around that hospital and that area. They look like the Palestinians are saying they're trying to evacuate the whole area of people, either as a buffer zone or for the settlers to go in. So it does look like Israel is getting on, while we're fighting with each other, it does look like Israel is kind of getting on with the Greater Israel Project, etc.
No secret. It was not. We said from October the 7th that when October the 8th came and the airstrike started and the genocide started, or we started seeing the early signs of what was going to come, we knew that this was a part of the Greater Israel Plan and that they were basically land grabbing to extend their settlements. We heard it from the officials.
This is interesting. Even though it's coming from an Islamophobe, this is an interesting point. Can you maybe say a few words on the Kurdish rebels and their point of view? Because obviously they're mostly on the side of the regime, right? So say a few things about the Kurds.
So mainly the YPG and the PKK, who are the Syrian Democratic Forces in Syria, mainly made up of YPG and PKK. PKK is a listed terrorist organization in Turkey and EU and other Western states. These guys are funded and armed by the US, but tend and work hand in glove with the Assad regime. The Kurdish issue, we should make a distinction between Kurdish Marxists, who are mainly YPG and PKK, and the fact that many Kurdish people are just ordinary Sunni Kurdish Muslims, right? But the ones who are most powerful militarily, financially, and with political clout and backing is the PKK. Now, their main enemy is Turkey and the Turkish Republic. They want an independent Kurdistan, but the Kurds always get done over.
Okay, so we put our cards on the table after a week of silence on Twitter.
Yeah.
Wait for the backlash.
How do you think it went?
I think, look, ultimately, the point I want to make is that everyone thinks that everyone's in someone's pocket. And brothers and sisters, we're in no one's pocket. We're in the Ummah's pocket. That's literally who we're in. You know, we're in Allah's pocket. We're in the Quran and Sunnah's pocket. That's literally, so we've given our honest opinions today, not because someone's paying us to say what we're saying. Those were genuinely Dilly's opinions. These are genuinely my opinions. From my brain, you know, and please forgive me if I'm wrong. Possibly I was wrong. And that's completely on me if I was wrong. And same with Dilly, same with you.
And it can happen.
But these are our genuine, honest opinions. Not because anyone's paying us to say this or anyone's pressuring us.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good one to end on. And yeah, I guess, of course, we would love to hear what you guys have to think and say. And of course, the best way to do that is to put it in the comment section once this video gets released, inshallah. And of course, make sure you put any questions in, because we usually respond to those as well as best we can, and possibly even react to it in a future show, inshallah. Well, thanking you very much, Dilly, for joining us.
I always do that.
I was waiting for it.
I always interrupt him when he does his outro. That's probably the most serious Muslims Uncensored we've ever done. It was a serious topic, though. I don't think it would have been. I think banter would have been out of place today, but it was just deadly serious, wasn't it?
It's a bit hard to laugh about civil war, isn't it? It's a bit hard to find a joke. But there you go. There you go. Please do make sure you like, share and subscribe. It helps the channel immensely. And until next time, we will catch you on the next edition of Muslims Uncensored, inshallah. Thank you very much to Dilly and Roshan, and to you at home for watching as well. It's Assalamu alaikum for now.